The conference room fell deadly silent except for the sound of Simone's heart shattering into a million pieces. Marcus couldn't even look at her as she stood frozen in the doorway, still holding the laptop she'd forgotten, while Vivian hastily pulled down her skirt behind the very table where Simone had shared her grandmother's most sacred recipes just hours before. How long? Simone's voice cut through the tension like a knife. Marcus finally raised his eyes, guilt written across every line of his face. Simone, I can explain. How long, Marcus? Her voice echoed off the walls. Vivian stepped forward, her usual sharp confidence nowhere to be found. Simone, we never meant for you to find out like this. 6 months, Marcus whispered, his voice barely audible. 6 months. 6 months of lies. 6 months of her cooking elaborate dinners for a man who was being fed elsewhere. 6 months of pouring her soul into recipes while he poured his heart into someone else. You didn't just break my heart, Simone said, her voice steady despite the earthquake inside her chest. You stole my entire future. Welcome back, Golden Family, to my incredible subscribers who make this journey possible. Thank you for being here. Your support means everything, and today's story will remind you why authentic love always wins in the end, so please stay with me till the end. 5 years. 5 beautiful, intoxicating years of the kind of love that makes you believe in fairy tales. The kind where he'd wake up early just to watch her move around the kitchen, her dark skin glowing in the morning light as she whispered sweet words to ingredients like they were old friends. Baby, you're making magic again, Marcus would say, sliding his arms around her waist from behind, pressing kisses to her neck while she stirred whatever culinary masterpiece was taking shape on their stove. Simone would melt into his embrace, her body fitting perfectly against his chest. It's not magic, Marcus. It's love. Love makes everything taste better. And God, did she love him? Loved the way he believed in her dreams when she was just a culinary school graduate with big ambitions and bigger heart. Loved how he'd sit for hours listening to her talk about flavor profiles and cultural fusion, his eyes lighting up not because he understood every word, but because he understood her passion. You're going to change the food world, Simone, he'd tell her after she'd earned her James Beard nomination at just 28. And I want to be right there beside you when you do it. That nomination changed everything for them. Suddenly, Simone wasn't just Marcus's talented girlfriend who could cook, she was a rising star in the culinary world, someone with the vision and skill to build something extraordinary. We should start our own company, Marcus said one night as they lay tangled in silk sheets, her head on his chest, his fingers tracing lazy patterns on her bare shoulder. Combine your culinary genius with my business sense. We could create something the food media world has never seen. Simone lifted her head to look at him, her eyes sparkling with possibility. A multimedia food empire? Cookbooks, videos, interactive experiences? Exactly. But not just any food company. Marcus's voice grew passionate as he painted their future in words. Something that honors your heritage, your grandmother's recipes, your story. Something real and authentic in a world full of fake food personalities. She kissed him then, deep and slow, tasting their shared dreams on his lips. Nourish Media, she whispered against his mouth. What? That's what we'll call it. Nourish Media. Because we're not just feeding bodies, we're nourishing souls. 4 months, they worked side by side, turning their Oakland apartment into a makeshift office by day and returning it to their love nest by night. Simone would develop recipes while Marcus handled business plans and investor meetings. They'd test dishes together, her feeding him spoonfuls of this and that, both of them moaning with pleasure when she got the flavors just right. This jollof rice mac and cheese is going to make you famous, Marcus said one evening, his eyes rolling back as he savored another bite. Us famous, Simone corrected, wiping a drop of cheese sauce from his chin before licking it off her thumb. We're in this together, remember? Forever, he promised, pulling her onto his lap and kissing her like he meant it. But as their business dreams grew bigger, Marcus realized they needed help, specifically, someone who understood digital marketing and brand building in ways neither of them did. I found her, he announced one day, bursting through their apartment door with the kind of excitement usually reserved for good news. The missing piece of our puzzle. Simone looked up from her laptop where she'd been writing recipe descriptions. Her? Vivian Carrick. She's brilliant, Simone. Worked with some of the biggest food brands on the West Coast. She specializes in taking authentic voices and helping them reach massive audiences without losing what makes them special. Something flickered in Simone's chest, not quite jealousy, but a protective instinct she couldn't name. And she wants to work with us? She wants to partner with us. Equal partnership, the three of us. She's seen your James Beard nomination, watched some of our test videos. She thinks we could build something revolutionary. Simone closed her laptop, giving Marcus her full attention. What's she like? Sharp. Focused. She has these intense eyes that seem to see right through you. But in a good way, like she can see potential where others see problems. And you trust her? Marcus sat beside her on their couch, taking her hands in his. Baby, I trust us. What we have is unbreakable. Adding Vivian to the team just means we'll build our dreams faster and bigger than we ever could alone. The first time Simone met Vivian Carrick, she understood exactly what Marcus meant about those eyes. They were pale gray like winter storms and seemed to catalog everything they saw. Vivian was tall and lean, with sharp cheekbones and blonde hair that fell in perfect waves. She carried herself with the confidence of someone who'd never been told she couldn't have something she wanted. Simone, Vivian said, extending a manicured hand. I've been dying to meet the genius behind those flavor combinations. Your jollof mac and cheese recipe is going to change everything. Thank you, Simone replied, noting how Vivian's handshake was firm, professional, and held just a beat too long. I have so many ideas for how we can position your cookbook, Vivian continued, her eyes lighting up with the kind of enthusiasm that was infectious. The fusion of Southern comfort food with West African flavors, it's not just delicious, it's culturally revolutionary. We can build a brand around authenticity, heritage, and innovation. Despite her initial wariness, Simone found herself drawn to Vivian's vision. This woman understood the deeper meaning behind her recipes, saw them not just as food but as storytelling vehicles for cultural connection and personal history. She gets it, Simone told Marcus that night as they prepared dinner together. She really understands what I'm trying to do with the fusion concept. I told you she was perfect for us, Marcus said, seasoning the chicken while Simone prepped vegetables. The three of us are going to build something incredible. And so Nourish Media was born, a beautiful triangle of ambition, creativity, and trust. Simone brought the culinary vision and authentic voice. Marcus provided business acumen and operational structure. Vivian delivered marketing brilliance and brand strategy. Their first official meeting as partners took place in a rented conference room in downtown Oakland, the same room where months later, Simone's heart would be shattered beyond recognition. But that day it was full of hope and possibility. To Nourish Media, Marcus said, raising his coffee cup in a toast. And to the three most determined people I know finally joining forces to change the food media landscape. To authentic voices and revolutionary flavors, Vivian added, her gray eyes sparkling with ambition. To family recipes finally getting the platform they deserve, Simone concluded, clinking her cup against theirs. Family recipes. That phrase would come back to haunt her in ways she never could have imagined. Because when you share your family's most sacred culinary secrets with people you trust, you're not just sharing ingredients and techniques, you're sharing your soul, your history, your grandmother's love made manifest in every carefully measured spoon of spice. And some people, Simone would learn, see that vulnerability not as a gift to be treasured, but as a weakness to be exploited. The cookbook project became Simone's obsession in the most beautiful way possible. Every morning she'd wake up in Marcus's arms and immediately start talking about flavor combinations and cultural connections, her voice animated with the kind of passion that made Marcus fall deeper in love with her every single day. I want to tell the story of how my great-grandmother's recipes traveled from Nigeria to Alabama, she'd say, her naked body pressed against his as dawn light filtered through their bedroom curtains. How enslaved people took ingredients from their homeland and created something entirely new with what they could find in the American South. Marcus would trace lazy circles on her bare back, listening to her dreams take shape. That's not just a cookbook, baby. That's cultural documentation. That's preserving history through food. Exactly. Simone would turn to face him, her eyes bright with excitement. And Vivian understands the marketing potential. She says we can create an entire multimedia experience around it, videos showing the cooking process, interactive family trees connecting recipes to regions, even virtual cooking classes. What Simone didn't notice was how Marcus's expression would shift slightly whenever she mentioned Vivian's ideas. How his fingers would pause their gentle caressing, or how he'd suddenly need to check his phone. The three of them spent countless hours in that downtown Oakland conference room, the same space that would later become the scene of Simone's devastation. But during those early planning sessions, it felt like a sacred space where dreams were being born. Tell us about this one, Vivian would say, pointing to one of the handwritten recipe cards Simone had spread across the mahogany table. Her voice held genuine curiosity, and Simone felt seen in a way that was both professional and deeply personal. That's my grandmother's mac and cheese recipe, Simone would explain, her voice soft with reverence. But I want to elevate it with aged Gouda and a touch of Berbera spice blend. The Ethiopian spice adds this incredible depth that connects to the African roots of comfort food. The story behind that fusion is what's going to make people cry happy tears, Vivian said, leaning forward with those intense gray eyes focused completely on Simone. You're not just mixing flavors, you're reuniting separated cultures through food. Marcus watched these exchanges with what Simone interpreted as pride in his girlfriend's brilliance. She didn't recognize it as something else entirely, the look of a man watching two women connect in ways that made him feel simultaneously aroused and excluded. What about the shrimp and grits recipe? Marcus asked, his voice carrying an edge Simone couldn't identify. That's going to be revolutionary, Simone said, pulling out another weathered card. Traditional southern shrimp and grits, but I'm using Nigerian palm oil instead of butter, and adding Scotch bonnet peppers for heat. It's like my ancestors are finally having a conversation across time and space. That's beautiful, Vivian breathed, and when she looked at Simone, there was something in her expression that went beyond professional admiration. The cookbook wasn't just a business project, it was Simone's love letter to her heritage, her family, and her own creative vision. Every recipe represented hours of experimentation in her kitchen, with Marcus as her eager taste tester and Vivian as her strategic sounding board. Try this, Simone would say during their evening recipe development sessions, sliding a spoon of something divine between Marcus's lips. He'd close his eyes, letting the flavors dance on his tongue before pulling her close and kissing her deeply. You're going to make people fall in love with food all over again. That's the plan, she'd whisper against his mouth, her heart full of love for him and hope for their shared future. But even then, small cracks were beginning to form in their perfect foundation. Marcus started staying later at their improvised office space, claiming he needed to work on investor presentations and business development. You two go ahead, he'd say when Simone suggested dinner together. I've got some calls to make with potential West Coast distributors. Time zone differences, you know? Simone would go home alone, sometimes cooking elaborate test recipes for one, saving portions in the refrigerator for Marcus to try when he eventually made it home. She'd fall asleep in their bed, often waking to find him sliding in beside her in the early hours of the morning, smelling like coffee and something she couldn't quite identify. How were the investor calls? She'd murmur sleepily, curling into his warmth. Productive, he'd answer, his voice carrying a strange tension. Vivian had some great insights about market positioning. Vivian. Always Vivian these days. Simone pushed down the small voice in her head that wondered why so many of Marcus's late-night business strategies seemed to involve their blonde business partner. The cookbook proposal presentation was scheduled for a Tuesday evening in November. Simone had spent weeks perfecting not just the recipes, but the story arc that would take readers on a journey through her family's culinary history. She'd even brought her most precious possessions, her great-grandmother's handwritten recipe cards, yellowed with age and stained with decades of cooking. These are sacred to me, she told Marcus and Vivian as she carefully arranged the fragile cards on the conference table. My great-grandmother couldn't read or write English well, but she wrote these recipes in a mixture of English and Igbo. They're the only things I have left of her. Vivian leaned forward, studying the cards with what appeared to be reverent fascination. The authenticity of these is incredible, Simone. Imagine the cookbook photography we could do with these as props. The juxtaposition of handwritten tradition with modern culinary innovation. They're not props, Simone said quietly, a protective edge creeping into her voice. They're family heirlooms. Of course, Vivian backtracked smoothly. I meant as inspiration for the visual storytelling. The emotional weight they carry will translate beautifully in the multimedia presentations. Marcus stood behind Simone's chair as she presented her cookbook concept, his hands resting on her shoulders in what she interpreted as supportive intimacy. She couldn't see the way his eyes kept drifting to Vivian, or how Vivian's gaze would meet his with a knowing intensity that had nothing to do with business strategy. The cookbook will be called From My Grandmother's Kitchen to Yours, a journey of flavor, family, and finding your voice, Simone announced, her voice strong with conviction. It's not just about recipes, it's about cultural preservation, family legacy, and the revolutionary act of a Black woman claiming her space in the food media landscape. It's perfect, Marcus said, squeezing her shoulders. Absolutely perfect. The market is hungry for authentic voices like yours, Vivian added. This cookbook is going to change everything for Nourish Media. For all of us. All of us. Those words would echo in Simone's mind months later when she realized that all of us had become the two of them somewhere along the way, with her relegated to the role of creative content provider rather than equal partner. But that night, riding high on the success of her presentation and the enthusiasm of her partners, Simone felt like she was exactly where she belonged. She carefully packed away her great-grandmother's recipe cards, unaware that she was also packing away the last moments of her innocence. "Dinner?" Marcus asked as they prepared to leave the conference room. "I'm exhausted," Vivian said, stretching in a way that drew attention to her long, lean frame. "I think I'll head home and start working on some preliminary marketing strategies for the cookbook launch." "You sure?" Marcus asked, and there was something in his tone that made Simone glance up from organizing her presentation materials. "Positive. You two enjoy your evening. You've earned it after that incredible presentation." Marcus kissed Simone goodbye in the parking lot, his lips lingering on hers with what felt like genuine passion and pride. "I'm so proud of you, baby. You're about to become a household name." "We're about to become a household name," she corrected, the same way she always did. "Right?" he said, but something in his voice sounded different. "We." That night, they made love with an intensity that felt like celebration and desperation all at once. Simone attributed the desperation to excitement about their shared future. She had no way of knowing it was actually Marcus's guilt about the future he was secretly planning without her. The next morning, Simone woke up alone. Marcus had left early for what he claimed was a breakfast meeting with potential investors. She made coffee for one and started developing a new recipe, a fusion of her grandmother's cornbread with Nigerian plantain that she was excited to share with her partners. She had no idea that while she was in her kitchen creating magic from love and tradition, Marcus was in a different kitchen entirely, tasting flavors that had nothing to do with food and everything to do with betrayal. The change didn't happen overnight. Betrayal rarely does. It creeps in like smoke under a door, so subtle you don't notice until the room is already filled with poison and you can barely breathe. It started with Marcus's schedule shifting in ways that seemed perfectly reasonable. "Vivian wants to meet early tomorrow to discuss the digital marketing strategy," he'd say, already reaching for his keys while Simone was still in her robe, coffee mug in hand. "What time?" she'd ask. 7. Coffee shop near her apartment. You know how she is about getting started early. Simone didn't know how Vivian was about anything really. Their business partner remained somewhat mysterious, sharing strategic brilliance during meetings but revealing little about her personal life. Unlike Marcus, who wore his heart on his sleeve, and Simone, who shared everything from her grandmother's stories to her deepest fears, Vivian kept her cards close to her chest. "Maybe I should come too," Simone suggested one morning as Marcus grabbed his jacket. "It's really just technical stuff," Marcus replied quickly. "ROI calculations, audience demographic analysis. You'd be bored out of your mind." He kissed her forehead, a brotherly peck that should have been her first real warning sign. When had his kisses become so polite? "I'll make dinner," she called after him. "That jollof rice fusion you love." "Don't wait up if I'm late," he called back. You know how these strategy sessions can run long. Strategy sessions. The phrase became Marcus's favorite excuse, used so frequently that Simone started to hate the sound of it. Strategy sessions for market research. Strategy sessions for investor presentations. Strategy sessions for brand positioning. Always with Vivian. Always running late. Always leaving Simone alone with perfectly prepared meals growing cold on their dining room table. "We're building something incredible, baby," Marcus would say when he finally came home, sometimes after midnight, smelling like coffee and something else, a perfume that definitely wasn't Simone's warm vanilla scent. "These long hours are going to pay off when we launch." Simone wanted to believe him. Love has a way of making you accept explanations that logic would reject. So she threw herself deeper into recipe development, spending her lonely evenings creating culinary masterpieces that told the story of her heritage through every carefully balanced spice. She'd photograph her creations, write detailed notes about flavor profiles and cultural connections, then save portions for Marcus to try. Her refrigerator became a museum of untouched leftovers, evidence of love offerings that went unacknowledged. "Try this," she'd say when he finally made it home, reheating her latest creation while he scrolled through his phone. Delicious," he'd mumble without really tasting, his attention clearly elsewhere. "It's my take on pepper soup but with a southern twist. I added andouille sausage and served it over cornbread dumplings." "Sounds great, babe. Really innovative." But he wasn't really listening. His phone buzzed with a text message, and Simone caught a glimpse of the sender name, Vivian. At 11:47 p.m. "Work stuff?" she asked, trying to keep her voice light. Marcus's thumb moved quickly across the screen. Just some follow-up thoughts on tomorrow's presentation. Tomorrow's presentation. There was always a tomorrow's presentation, a next week's investor meeting, a crucial deadline that required Marcus's immediate attention and took him away from their dinner table, their bed, their conversations about the future they were supposedly building together. If you've ever felt yourself becoming the third wheel in your own relationship, comment same below. Because sometimes the person you love most starts treating you like an interruption in their real life. The breaking point came on a Thursday evening in March. Simone had spent the entire day perfecting her grandmother's pound cake recipe, adding a touch of Nigerian palm wine to the batter that created the most incredible depth of flavor. She'd planned a romantic evening, candles, wine, the cake as dessert after Marcus's favorite dinner of braised short ribs with jollof rice risotto. Marcus walked through the door at 6:30, exactly when he'd promised to be home for their dinner date. Vivian pulled her skirt down with hands that shook, but her eyes when they met Simone's held not just shame but defiance. As if she'd been caught at something she wasn't entirely sorry about. The conference room fell deadly silent except for the sound of Simone's heart shattering into a million pieces. She stood there, still holding her phone charger, while the two people she trusted most in the world scrambled to cover up their betrayal. How long? The words came out of Simone's mouth like broken glass. Marcus couldn't even look at her. His hands were shaking as he tried to button his shirt. Simone, I can explain. How long, Marcus? Her voice echoed off the walls, filled with a pain so raw it seemed to change the air pressure in the room. Vivian stepped forward, and there was something almost courageous about the way she met Simone's eyes. Simone, we never meant for you to find out like this. Don't. Simone's voice cut through Vivian's words like a blade. Don't you dare speak to me. You don't get to explain anything. You don't get to make this better with words. She turned back to Marcus, the man she'd loved for 5 years, the man she'd built dreams with, the man who was supposed to be her partner in everything. How long? Marcus's voice, when it finally came, was barely a whisper. 6 months. 6 months. The words hit Simone like a physical blow. 6 months of lies. 6 months of strategy sessions. 6 months of her cooking elaborate dinners for a man who was being fed elsewhere. 6 months of lonely nights and polite kisses and feeling like she was competing for attention in her own relationship. 6 months of her pouring her soul into recipes while Marcus was pouring his body into someone else. 6 months, she repeated, her voice strangely calm. So when I was sharing my great-grandmother's stories with you, when I was trusting you with my family's most sacred recipes, when I was planning our future together, you were already with her. It wasn't supposed to happen, Marcus said desperately. It started as attraction and then... Don't. Simone held up her hand. Don't you dare make this sound like something that happened to you. You chose this. Every day for 6 months you chose this. She looked around the conference room at her great-grandmother's recipe cards scattered across the table where Marcus and Vivian had just been. She couldn't even finish the thought. You didn't just break my heart, she said, her voice steady despite the earthquake splitting her chest open. You stole my entire future. You took everything I built, everything I dreamed, everything I trusted you with, and you turned it into this. Marcus took a step toward her, his eyes filled with tears that Simone found insulting. Simone, please. I love you. What Vivian and I have, it's not love. It's just. Stop talking. Simone's voice was ice. Just stop talking before you make this worse. She walked to the conference table and began gathering her great-grandmother's recipe cards with hands that somehow remained steady. Each card felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds. Each yellowed page represented trust that had been violated, intimacy that had been desecrated, family legacy that had been disrespected. You're taking those? Vivian asked, and there was something in her tone that made Simone's blood boil. These are mine, Simone said without looking up. They've always been mine. They're the only things in this room that actually belong to me. She tucked the cards carefully into her purse, protecting them from any more contamination from this poison space. Simone, we need to talk about this, Marcus said. About the business, about our partnership. There is no partnership. Simone finally looked at him, and the emptiness in her eyes made him step backward. There is no us. There is no future. There's just you and her and whatever mess you've made of my company. It's not your company, Vivian said quietly. It's our company. All three of us. Simone turned to face the woman who had systematically destroyed her life while pretending to be her ally. Is it? Because from where I'm standing, it looks like it's become your company. The two of you, making decisions, having strategy sessions, building something together while I created content for you to sell. The truth of those words settled over the room like dust after an explosion. Because that's exactly what had happened. While Simone had been developing recipes and writing cultural narratives and pouring her authentic voice into their shared project, Marcus and Vivian had been building their own partnership, personal, professional, and intimate. "That's not," Marcus started. "Save it for your lawyers," Simone said, shouldering her purse. "Because that's who you'll be talking to from now on." She walked toward the door, then stopped and turned back one more time. "I hope it was worth it," she said, looking at both of them. "I hope the sex was so incredible that it was worth destroying 5 years of love and 3 years of dreams and a friendship I actually believed in." Marcus was crying now, real tears streaming down his face. "Simone, please." "No," she said firmly. "You made your choice. 6 months ago you made your choice. Every day since then you've made your choice. So live with it." She walked out of that conference room, out of that building, out of the life she'd thought was hers, and she didn't look back. But as she sat in her car in the parking lot, hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly her knuckles were white, Simone allowed herself exactly 5 minutes to fall apart. 5 minutes to sob for the love she'd lost, the trust that had been shattered, the future that had been stolen from her. After 5 minutes, she wiped her tears, started her car, and drove toward what she didn't yet know would be the beginning of her greatest triumph. Because sometimes, when people steal your dreams, the universe gives you something better than you ever imagined possible. Sometimes, the worst betrayal becomes the catalyst for the most beautiful revenge. Simone just didn't know it yet. The lawyers came like vultures circling a fresh kill. 3 days after the conference room discovery, Simone received a certified letter that felt like a second betrayal. Marcus and Vivian weren't just stealing her heart and her trust. They were stealing her life's work with surgical precision and legal documents that made it all seem civilized and proper. "Ms. Williams," the letter began in that cold, impersonal language that lawyers use to make cruelty sound professional. "Our clients, Mr. Marcus Vale and Ms. Vivian Carrick, majority shareholders of Nourish Media LLC, are exercising their right to restructure the company's ownership and operational framework." Restructure. Such a clean word for what they were actually doing, ripping her life apart. Simone sat in her kitchen, still wearing the same clothes she'd worn to that disastrous presentation 3 days ago, reading legal language that stripped away everything she'd built. The apartment felt hollow without Marcus's presence, but she couldn't bring herself to pack his things or change the sheets that still smelled like his cologne. Her phone rang. Marcus's name on the screen made her stomach clench. "Don't answer," she told herself. But her heart, stubborn and still bleeding, made her swipe to accept the call. "Simone, please, we need to talk about this lawyer situation." Marcus's voice was strained, desperate. "There's nothing to talk about. Your letter was very clear. It doesn't have to be like this. We can work something out, the three of us." "The three of us?" Simone's laugh was bitter. "Marcus, there is no three of us. There never was. There was you and Vivian building something together while I provided the content. Now you're just making it official. That's not true. Your recipes, your vision, they're the heart of everything we built." They were the heart. Past tense. "Because according to your lawyers, I signed agreements that give the company ownership of any recipes I developed during our partnership." The silence on Marcus's end told her everything she needed to know. He hadn't expected her to read the fine print so carefully. He'd hoped she'd just accept whatever scraps they threw her and fade quietly into the background. "Simone, I never wanted it to happen like this. But you wanted it to happen. You wanted me gone so you could build your perfect little empire with Vivian without the inconvenience of the woman whose family recipes you're planning to profit from. It's not like that. It's exactly like that." Simone's voice was steady now, cold as winter morning. "You're taking my grandmother's legacy and turning it into your business plan. You're stealing my voice and calling it your content. You're erasing me from my own story." She hung up and threw her phone across the kitchen, watching it skitter across the hardwood floor. The silence that followed felt like death. The legal battle that followed was swift and merciless. Marcus and Vivian had 60% ownership of Nourish Media, a detail Simone had agreed to during the early days when she was drunk on love and trust. They had expensive lawyers who specialized in intellectual property and business dissolution. They had documentation of every recipe Simone had developed, every cultural story she'd shared, every family tradition she trusted them with. Simone had a court-appointed attorney who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else and a heart too broken to fight effectively. "The contracts are pretty ironclad," her lawyer, David Chin, told her during their consultation in his cramped downtown Oakland office. You signed work-for-hire agreements that assign ownership of any intellectual property developed during the partnership to the company. Since they have majority control. They own my grandmother's recipes. The words tasted like poison in Simone's mouth. Technically, they own the versions you adapted and the multimedia presentations you created around them. The original family recipes themselves can't be copyrighted, but your specific adaptations and the storytelling framework you built, that's considered company property. Simone stared out the grimy window at the Oakland skyline, at the city where she'd thought she was building her dream life. So they can publish my cookbook under their company name. Yes. And there's more. David's voice grew even more apologetic. They're also claiming the client list you helped develop, the brand partnerships you initiated, and the social media following you built. Everything that was created under the Nourish Media umbrella becomes theirs in the dissolution. If you've ever felt completely powerless while someone legally stole what was rightfully yours, let me know in the comments. Because sometimes the law protects the wrong people, and justice has to be served in other ways. The final insult came 2 weeks later, delivered not through lawyers but through Instagram. Simone was lying in bed at 2 a.m., unable to sleep, scrolling mindlessly through social media when she saw it. Marcus's post showed him and Vivian clinking champagne glasses in what looked like an expensive restaurant. They were both glowing with happiness, Vivian's ring finger conspicuously adorned with a diamond that caught the restaurant's mood lighting perfectly. The caption made Simone's blood turn to ice. Sometimes life gives you exactly what you need when you're brave enough to follow your heart. So grateful to have found my perfect business partner in life and love. Here's to building something beautiful together. #PowerCouple, #NourishMedia, #NewBeginnings. Perfect business partner in life and love. The words were like salt in a wound that hadn't even begun to heal. But the comments were worse. Hundreds of people congratulating them, calling them couple goals, praising their authentic partnership. Food bloggers and industry contacts that Simone had cultivated, relationships she had built, all celebrating Marcus and Vivian's love story like it was something beautiful instead of something born from betrayal and theft. One comment in particular made Simone's hands shake with rage. "You two are so inspiring. Can't wait to see what Nourish Media creates next. Your cookbook launch is going to be incredible." Their cookbook launch. Using her recipes. Telling her stories. Profiting from her family's legacy. Simone threw her phone across the room and screamed into her pillow until her throat was raw. The next morning she woke up in her cramped studio apartment in West Oakland, a far cry from the beautiful place she'd shared with Marcus. Her savings account had been drained by legal fees and the security deposit on this tiny space that was all she could afford now. Rejection letters from publishers covered her coffee table like fallen leaves. Not quite right for our list. The market is saturated with fusion cookbooks. Your voice lacks the platform necessary for commercial success. Platform. That was the word that kept appearing in every rejection. The platform she'd built under the Nourish Media brand now belonged to Marcus and Vivian. Without it, she was just another talented chef with recipes and no way to reach an audience. Simone made coffee in a kitchen so small she could touch both walls with her arms outstretched, and stared at the stack of bills she couldn't pay. Rent, utilities, student loans from culinary school, legal fees that would follow her for years. Outside her window, Oakland went about its business, indifferent to her pain. Somewhere across town, Marcus and Vivian were probably planning their future, their successful food media company, their profitable cookbook launch, their perfect life built on the foundation of her destroyed dreams. She thought about her great-grandmother's recipe cards, now safely hidden in a shoebox under her bed. They were the only things she'd managed to save from the wreckage. Everything else, her reputation, her platform, her financial security, her faith in love, had been stripped away with legal precision. But as Simone sat in that tiny kitchen, surrounded by rejection letters and unpaid bills, something began to shift inside her chest. It started as a spark of anger, then grew into a flame of determination that would soon become an inferno of purpose. Marcus and Vivian thought they had won. They thought they had taken everything that mattered. They had no idea that they had just awakened something in Simone that would make their victory taste like ashes in their mouths. The real war was about to begin. Sometimes salvation comes in the most unexpected packages. For Simone, it arrived in the form of Mrs. Chin, her 73-year-old Chinese neighbor who had a habit of appearing at exactly the right moment with exactly the right words. 3 weeks after the legal documents had stripped away everything she'd built, Simone was sitting on her fire escape at 6 a.m., still in yesterday's clothes, staring at her phone screen displaying her bank balance. $347.82. Not enough for next month's rent. Not enough for groceries. Barely enough to keep existing in this tiny apartment that felt more like a prison cell than a home. She'd been living on instant ramen and the kind of despair that makes you forget what hope feels like. Her cookbook manuscript sat untouched on her laptop, dozens of pages of cultural fusion recipes that felt meaningless now that she had no platform, no publisher, no way to share her voice with the world. The gentle knock on her door made her groan with frustration. Probably the landlord coming to discuss her upcoming rent payment that she couldn't make. But when she opened the door, Mrs. Chin stood in the hallway holding a thermal container that smelled like heaven and hope. "You look terrible, child," Mrs. Chin said in her direct way, pushing past Simone into the studio apartment. "When's the last time you ate real food?" Simone couldn't remember. Time had become meaningless in the fog of depression and rejection letters. "I brought dumplings," Mrs. Chin continued, unpacking the container with practiced efficiency. "Pork and chive. My grandmother's recipe from Guangzhou." The irony wasn't lost on Simone. Another grandmother's recipe. Another family legacy passed down through generations of women who understood that food was love made tangible. "Mrs. Chin, I appreciate this, but I'm not really hungry." "Sit." The command was gentle but non-negotiable. "Eat first. Talk after." The dumplings were perfect, delicate wrappers encasing savory filling that had been seasoned with decades of practice and love. As Simone ate, she felt something inside her chest loosen slightly. Not healing exactly, but the first suggestion that healing might be possible. "Better?" Mrs. Chin asked. Simone nodded, not trusting her voice. "Good. Now tell me what happened. And don't say nothing. I've been watching you waste away for weeks like someone stole your soul." Something about Mrs. Chen's matter-of-fact kindness broke through Simone's defenses. The story poured out: the betrayal, the legal battle, the stolen recipes, the engagement announcement, the rejection letters, the empty bank account. All of it. Mrs. Chen listened without interruption, occasionally nodding or making small sounds of disapproval when Marcus and Vivian's actions became particularly egregious. "Stupid girl," she said when Simone finished. "Excuse me? Not you. This Vivian woman. Stupid to think she can steal someone's voice and make it her own. Food doesn't work that way. Love doesn't work that way. Culture doesn't work that way." Simone felt tears threatening again. "But they have all the legal rights. They own my recipes, my platform, everything." "They own papers," Mrs. Chin said dismissively. "They don't own your hands. They don't own your grandmother's stories. They don't own your heart. That doesn't matter if I can't find a publisher. Nobody wants a cookbook from someone with no platform." Mrs. Chin was quiet for a long moment, studying Simone with eyes that had seen 8 decades of human nature in all its complexities. "My granddaughter lives in San Francisco," she said finally. "Works for small publishing house. Very smart girl, very good at seeing what others miss." Simone's heart did a small flutter, but she forced herself not to hope too much. She'd been disappointed too many times. "Mrs. Chin, I appreciate what you're trying to do, but small publishers probably can't. This one is different. They specialize in authentic voices. Stories that big publishers think won't sell because they don't understand that real always wins over fake, eventually." "I don't know." Mrs. Chin stood up with the determination of someone who had made a decision. "I'm calling her tonight. You're meeting her this week." "Mrs. Chin. No arguments. You want to give up? Fine. Give up after you meet with her. But don't give up before you try one more time with people who understand that your grandmother's love is worth more than their legal papers. If you've ever had someone show up in your darkest moment with exactly the help you needed, drop a heart emoji below. Because sometimes the universe sends angels in the form of neighbors who refuse to let you surrender. 2 days later, Simone found herself sitting in a small cafe in the Mission District, waiting for Diana Nakamura from Copper Canyon Press. She'd spent her last $20 on the BART fare to San Francisco and a cup of coffee she was nursing to justify taking up table space. Diana turned out to be a woman in her 40s with kind eyes and gray streaking through her black hair. She moved with the quiet confidence of someone who had spent years recognizing potential where others saw problems. "Mrs. Chin told me about your situation," Diana said after they'd exchanged pleasantries. "I'm sorry you're going through this. Betrayal in business is particularly cruel because it attacks both your heart and your livelihood." "Thank you for meeting with me," Simone said. "Though I should be honest, I don't have much to offer right now. No platform, no social media following, no industry connections that haven't already chosen sides." Diana smiled. "Can I tell you what I see when I look at you?" Simone nodded, though she couldn't imagine what anyone could see in her current state. I see a woman who has been through hell and is still sitting here, still fighting. I see someone who understands that food is storytelling, culture is resistance, and authenticity is revolutionary. I see a voice that the publishing world desperately needs, even if they don't know it yet. Simone felt something dangerous blooming in her chest. Hope. We're not a big publisher, Diana continued. We can't offer you the marketing budget that major houses can. We can't guarantee bestseller lists or national book tours. Simone's heart began to sink. But, Diana said, her voice growing stronger, we can offer you something more valuable. We can offer you the freedom to tell your real story. Not just recipes but memoir. Not just cooking instructions but cultural commentary. Not just a cookbook, but a manifesto about resilience, heritage, and the revolutionary act of a black woman claiming her space in a predominantly white industry. The words hit Simone like electricity. This was what she'd always wanted to do, not just share recipes but share the stories behind them, the cultural significance, the family connections that made each dish a piece of living history. We believe in authentic storytelling, Diana continued. Your cookbook won't just compete with theirs, it will make theirs look hollow and corporate by comparison. Because they might have your adapted recipes but they don't have your voice. They don't have your grandmother's stories. They don't have your truth. Simone's hands were shaking. What would you need from me? Everything. Your whole story. The love, the betrayal, the legal battle, the comeback. Frame it all around your grandmother's recipes and your cultural fusion innovations. Show readers not just how to cook but why these flavors matter, where they come from, what they represent. And you think people will want to read that? Diana leaned forward, her eyes bright with conviction. Simone, authenticity is the most powerful marketing tool in the world. People are hungry for real stories, real voices, real connections. Your ex-partners might have stolen your business platform, but they can't steal your truth. Simone thought about her great-grandmother's recipe cards, still hidden in the shoebox under her bed. She thought about the stories her grandmother had told her about flavors that connected continents and cultures. She thought about the fusion recipes she'd developed that weren't just innovative cooking but acts of cultural reclamation. When would you need the manuscript? Take your time. Get it right. This isn't about speed, it's about depth. Write the book that only you can write. Tell the story that only you can tell. That afternoon, Simone signed a contract with Copper Canyon Press. The advance wasn't huge, enough to pay rent for 6 months and buy groceries while she wrote, but it felt like winning the lottery. More importantly, it felt like getting her voice back. That night she called Mrs. Chen to thank her. Don't thank me yet, the older woman said. Thank me when your book makes those thieves regret what they stole. As Simone hung up the phone, she realized Mrs. Chen was right. This wasn't just about publishing a cookbook anymore. This was about proving that authentic voices couldn't be silenced, that stolen dreams could be rebuilt better than before, and that sometimes the people who try to destroy you end up giving you exactly the motivation you need to become unstoppable. Marcus and Vivian thought they had won by taking her platform and her recipes. They had no idea they had just handed her the greatest story she would ever tell. The transformation didn't happen overnight. Real change never does. But for the next 8 months, Simone lived and breathed her manuscript with the intensity of a woman who understood that this wasn't just a cookbook, it was her resurrection. She woke up every morning at 5 a.m. in her tiny studio apartment, made coffee in a kitchen barely large enough for one person, and sat at her second-hand desk with her great-grandmother's recipe cards spread before her like sacred texts. Each yellowed page represented not just ingredients and measurements, but generations of women who had survived, adapted, and thrived despite circumstances that tried to break them. Tell me your secrets, she would whisper to the cards, her fingers tracing the faded handwriting that mixed English with Igbo phrases. Tell me how to turn pain into power. The writing came in waves, sometimes flowing like honey, other times requiring her to wrestle each word onto the page. But with every sentence, Simone felt herself becoming stronger, more certain of her voice, more connected to the legacy she was carrying forward. She wrote about her great-grandmother's hands, weathered and wise, teaching a young girl the difference between cooking and creating love. She explored the brutal history of how African flavors had traveled to American soil through the violence of slavery, then transformed into something entirely new through the creativity and resilience of people who refused to let their culture die. This jollof rice mac and cheese isn't just fusion, she typed one morning, tears mixing with coffee as she remembered sharing this recipe with Marcus for the first time. It's revolution. It's my Nigerian ancestors speaking to my Southern grandmother across centuries of separation, creating something that honors both without betraying either. But the real magic happened when Simone decided to start sharing her journey online. She'd lost her platform with Nourish Media, but she hadn't lost her voice. Using her phone and the natural light from her tiny kitchen window, she began posting videos of herself cooking in that cramped space, talking candidly about betrayal, resilience, and the revolutionary act of reclaiming your narrative. "I'm Simone Williams," she said in her first video, standing in front of her 2-burner stove while stirring a pot of her grandmother's pepper soup. "6 months ago, the man I loved and the business partner I trusted stole my recipes, my platform, and my company. They thought they could steal my voice too." She lifted a spoonful of the rich, aromatic soup and tasted it, her eyes closing with satisfaction. They were wrong. The video was raw, unpolished, filmed in a kitchen that was clearly too small for the big dreams it contained. But something about Simone's authenticity, her vulnerability combined with fierce determination, struck a chord with viewers. 50 views became 500. 500 became 5,000. "Today I'm making my great-grandmother's cornbread," she said in another video, her hands working the batter while she talked. "But I'm adding plantain flour because I believe our ancestors' ingredients should dance together, not fight. This bread represents something they tried to steal from me, the right to tell my own family's story." Each video was a small act of rebellion. Each recipe shared was proof that authentic voices couldn't be silenced by legal documents. Each story told was evidence that culture belonged to the people who lived it, not the companies that tried to package it. If you've ever had to rebuild yourself from nothing and found strength you didn't know you had, drop a phoenix emoji below. Because sometimes destruction is just preparation for your most beautiful rebirth. The breakthrough came 4 months into her writing process. Simone had posted a video making her revolutionary shrimp and grits, the one with Nigerian palm oil and Scotch bonnet peppers that represented the conversation between her ancestors across time and space. "Food is storytelling," she said to the camera, her voice steady and strong. "When someone steals your recipes, they're not just taking ingredients and measurements. They're trying to steal your family's voice, your culture's memory, your right to define yourself." The video went viral overnight. 100,000 views became 500,000. Food Network personalities started sharing it. Celebrity chefs praised her innovative approach and fearless honesty about the industry's tendency to appropriate rather than appreciate. But the comment that made Simone cry, happy tears this time, came from a young black chef in Atlanta. "Thank you for showing me that my grandmother's recipes aren't just food, they're resistance. You're teaching me to be proud of flavors I was trained to think weren't sophisticated enough." That's when Simone knew she wasn't just writing a cookbook anymore. She was starting a movement. Her social media following grew organically, authentically. No paid promotions, no marketing gimmicks, just the raw power of a woman telling her truth and connecting with people who recognized their own struggles in her story. 200,000 followers became 400,000. Food and Wine featured her in an article about Voices Redefining American Cuisine. The James Beard Foundation invited her to speak at a symposium about cultural appropriation versus appreciation in food media. Meanwhile, across town, Nourish Media was struggling. Simone learned this not from Marcus or Vivian, she'd blocked them on all platforms, but from industry whispers and declining social media engagement on their accounts. Their cookbook, finally published 18 months after forcing Simone out, had received mediocre reviews that used words like technically proficient but soulless and lacking cultural depth. "The recipes feel borrowed rather than lived," one critic wrote. "There's a fundamental authenticity missing that makes the entire project feel hollow." Simone read these reviews with a mixture of satisfaction and sadness. She'd never wanted Marcus and Vivian to fail, she'd wanted them to succeed with her, building something beautiful together. But they'd chosen theft over partnership, shortcuts over authenticity, and now they were learning the harsh lesson that stolen voices never sing as sweetly as authentic ones. Her manuscript grew from 200 pages to 300, then 350. Each chapter wove together recipes with memoir, cultural history with personal healing, cooking instructions with revolutionary manifesto. Diana had been right, this wasn't just a cookbook. It was a declaration of independence. From my grandmother's kitchen to yours, a journey of flavor, family, and finding your voice became more than a title. It became a promise to readers that they would find not just recipes, but permission to claim their own stories, honor their own heritage, and resist anyone who tried to steal their authentic voice. The pre-orders started 6 months before publication. First hundreds, then thousands, then tens of thousands. Food bloggers who had never heard of Copper Canyon Press were suddenly talking about Simone's upcoming book like it was the publishing event of the year. But the sweetest moment came 8 months after she'd started writing, when Simone received a call that would change everything. "Simone," Diana's voice was barely containing excitement, "you need to sit down." "What's wrong?" "Nothing's wrong. Everything's right. The pre-orders just hit 100,000 copies. We haven't even announced the official publication date yet." Simone sat down heavily on her tiny apartment's only chair, staring at the manuscript pages scattered across her desk. 100,000 people wanted to read her story. 100,000 people believed in her voice. "There's more," Diana continued. "Netflix wants to discuss a streaming series based on the book. And 3 major publishers are asking if we'd consider letting them distribute the paperback edition." Simone thought about Marcus and Vivian's Instagram posts celebrating their success, with stolen recipes and hollow victories. She thought about the conference room where they desecrated her family's legacy. She thought about the legal documents that had tried to silence her. Then she looked at her great-grandmother's recipe cards, still spread across her desk like a blessing, and smiled. "Diana," she said, her voice steady and strong, "I think it's time to announce that publication date. Because sometimes the best revenge isn't crushing your enemies. Sometimes it's becoming so magnificently, authentically successful that their betrayal becomes irrelevant." And Simone was just getting started. The night before her book launch, Simone stood in her new apartment in Berkeley, a beautiful space with a real kitchen, large windows, and room to breathe, arranging flowers for the celebration that would change her life forever. The advance from Copper Canyon Press had allowed her to move out of that cramped studio, but more importantly, the pre-order numbers had proven that authentic voices could build audiences that corporate manipulation never could. She was folding napkins when her phone rang. Marcus's name on the screen made her stomach clench with familiar pain, but this time it was accompanied by something new, a sense of her own power. She almost didn't answer. Almost let it go to voicemail like she had for the dozens of calls over the past months. But something told her this call would be different. "Simone." His voice cracked when she picked up. Thank you for answering. What do you want, Marcus?" The silence stretched between them like a chasm filled with everything they destroyed and everything they could never rebuild. "I made a mistake," he said finally. "The biggest mistake of my life." Simone continued folding napkins, her hands steady now in ways they hadn't been a year ago. "You made several mistakes. Which one specifically are you referring to?" "Letting you go. Choosing," he couldn't say Vivian's name. "Choosing what I thought was easier instead of fighting for what was real." "What was real, Marcus?" Another silence, longer this time. Through her window, Simone could see the bay sparkling under city lights. Tomorrow, hundreds of people would celebrate her book launch at an event that Food and Wine was covering. Tomorrow, her truth would officially be available to the world. "You were real," he whispered. "We were real. Your dreams, your recipes, your vision for the company, that was the only real thing we had." Simone closed her eyes, remembering the man she'd fallen in love with 7 years ago. The one who'd supported her culinary dreams, who'd held her when she cried after her grandmother's funeral, who'd believed in their shared vision before Vivian's winter storm eyes had clouded his judgment. "I know," she said softly. "But real wasn't enough for you then. And it's too late now. Simone, please. I have to go, Marcus. Tomorrow's a big day." She hung up and returned to her preparations, her hands steady as she arranged flowers for the launch party that would change her life forever. From My Grandmother's Kitchen to Yours, a journey of flavor, family, and finding your voice, debuted at number 3 on the New York Times bestseller list. Simone was in her new test kitchen, a beautiful converted space in Oakland's Arts District that she'd rented with her advance money, when Diana called with the news. 3? Simone repeated, barely believing the words. 3. Behind a celebrity memoir and a political exposé. But Simone, the trajectory is incredible. Pre-orders are still pouring in and the reviews. Diana's voice grew emotional. The Washington Post called it a masterpiece of culinary memoir that redefines what American food storytelling can be. The reviews had been overwhelming. The New York Times praised her fearless vulnerability and revolutionary approach to cultural fusion. Food and Wine declared it essential reading for anyone who wants to understand how food becomes resistance. But the review that made Simone cry came from a small food blog run by a young Latina chef. Simone Williams has given us permission to be proud of our grandmother's recipes and our own adaptations of them. This book isn't just about cooking, it's about cultural survival. Within a month, the book had climbed to number 1, where it stayed for 12 consecutive weeks. The accompanying Netflix series featuring Simone cooking in locations that traced her family's journey from Nigeria to Alabama to California was picked up for 2 seasons before the first episode even aired. Her speaking fees quadrupled overnight. Corporations that had never heard of her were offering endorsement deals. Celebrity chefs who had ignored her during the Nourish Media days were suddenly sliding into her DMs with collaboration proposals. But the sweetest validation came from an unexpected source. Simone was developing recipes for her second cookbook when she received a call from her lawyer, not the overworked court-appointed attorney from her legal battle, but the entertainment lawyer she could now afford. "Simone," he said, barely containing his excitement, "you're going to want to sit down for this. Good news or bad news? Depends on your perspective. Nourish Media is filing for bankruptcy." The words hit Simone like a wave of vindication and sadness all at once. She'd spent so many months dreaming of this moment, but now that it was here, she felt more empty than triumphant. "Marcus Vail and Vivian Carrick are liquidating all assets," her lawyer continued. "They want to know if you're interested in purchasing the company name and client list." Simone was standing in her test kitchen, sunlight streaming through industrial windows, surrounded by herbs growing on every available surface. The space smelled like possibility and redemption. On her windowsill sat a framed photo of her grandmother, whose eyes seemed to twinkle with mischief. "What's their asking price?" she asked, though she already knew she could afford whatever they named. When he told her, she laughed, not from cruelty but from the pure irony of it all. The amount was exactly what she'd earned from her first month of cookbook sales. 1 month of authentic success equaled everything they'd tried to build on stolen foundations. "Tell them I'll think about it," she said. That evening she called Aunt Jewel, her grandmother's sister who had helped raise her after her parents died. The family matriarch's voice was warm with pride. "Baby girl, your grandmother would be so proud. Not just of your success but of how you handled yourself. You could have been bitter, could have let that betrayal poison your heart. Instead, you turned it into something beautiful. I'm thinking about buying the company, Aunt Jewel. Starting over with my own vision. What does your heart tell you?" Simone looked around her test kitchen, then at the framed photo of her grandmother on the windowsill. The old woman's eyes seemed to twinkle with mischief and wisdom. "My heart says some recipes are worth perfecting, but some ingredients are just too rotten to save." The next morning she called her lawyer back. "Tell Marcus and Vivian thank you for the offer, but I'm building something better." 6 months later, Simone launched Roots and Branches Media from her Oakland headquarters, a beautiful converted warehouse space that buzzed with creative energy and authentic voices. Her mission statement was simple but revolutionary: elevating diverse voices in food media while honoring the cultural traditions that make us who we are. Her first signing was a young Latina chef from East LA who'd been rejected by every major publisher because her recipes were too ethnic. Her second was a black farmer from Mississippi who wanted to document the connection between soil and soul food. Her third was a Korean-American baker whose grandmother's techniques had been dismissed as not commercial enough by traditional publishing houses. "We're not just publishing cookbooks," Simone told the reporter from Forbes who was profiling her meteoric rise. "We're preserving cultural memories, amplifying silenced voices, and proving that authenticity sells better than appropriation." On the 1-year anniversary of her cookbook launch, Simone hosted a celebration at her headquarters. The guest list included James Beard Award winners, Netflix executives, Food Network personalities, and 3 generations of her own family who'd driven from Alabama to be there. Marcus wasn't invited, but she spotted him across the street as guests arrived, standing beside a black sedan like a ghost haunting his own funeral. Their eyes met through the window. He raised his hand, not quite a wave, more like a surrender. She nodded once, then turned back to her guests, to her life, to the future she'd built from the ashes of betrayal. Later that night, as she cleaned up with help from her team, her chosen family of creative collaborators who understood that the best businesses, like the best recipes, are built on trust, respect, and shared vision, Simone reflected on the strange alchemy of heartbreak and triumph. She'd learned that some losses are actually gains in disguise. That being forced to rebuild from nothing can teach you exactly what you're made of. And that the sweetest revenge isn't crushing your enemies, it's becoming so magnificently, authentically yourself that their betrayal becomes irrelevant. Her phone buzzed with a text from Diana. "Pre-orders for cookbook number 2 just hit 100K. The publishing world is officially your oyster." Simone smiled, thinking of her grandmother's hands guiding her through that first cornbread recipe all those years ago. "Add love to everything you make," the old woman had said. "Even when your heart is broken, especially then. Love is the secret ingredient that makes everything else possible." She'd been right as always. Simone had added love for her craft, her culture, her story, and ultimately herself. And that love had transformed betrayal into bestsellers, heartbreak into healing, and the end of one dream into the beginning of something far more beautiful. Outside, Oakland sparkled with possibility, and in her test kitchen, tomorrow's recipes waited to be born. 5 years later, Simone Rochelle Williams stood in the same conference room where her heart had been shattered, where her trust had been violated, where her dreams had been stolen. But this time, she wasn't the broken woman who had discovered betrayal on that mahogany table. She was the CEO of a multimillion-dollar media empire, the best-selling author of 3 cookbooks, and the voice that had revolutionized how America thought about cultural fusion and authentic storytelling. Nourish Media's old building had been renovated and renamed. The conference room was now part of a community culinary center that Simone had funded, a place where young chefs from diverse backgrounds could learn not just cooking techniques, but how to protect their voices, their recipes, and their cultural heritage from those who would steal rather than celebrate. Full circle, she murmured to herself, running her fingers along the same table where Marcus and Vivian had betrayed her, where she'd left her great-grandmother's recipe cards scattered like forgotten prayers. Today that table held something different: contracts for her 4th cookbook, licensing agreements for her upcoming restaurant chain, and partnership proposals from networks who wanted to work with the woman who had proven that authenticity could build empires better than appropriation ever could. Her phone buzzed with a text from Diana, now her business partner as well as her publisher. The documentary about your journey just got picked up by HBO. They're calling it The Recipe for Resilience: How One Woman Turned Betrayal into a Media Empire. Simone smiled, thinking about how that broken-hearted woman from 5 years ago could never have imagined this moment. That woman had believed her worth was tied to Marcus's love, her success dependent on their partnership, her voice valuable only when amplified by their platform. She'd been wrong about all of it. The real lesson wasn't about revenge, though the satisfaction of watching Marcus and Vivian's stolen empire crumble had been sweet. The real lesson was about understanding that when someone tries to steal your voice, your culture, your dreams, they can only succeed if you let them. Marcus and Vivian had taken her recipes, but they couldn't take her grandmother's stories. They'd stolen her platform, but they couldn't steal her authenticity. They'd broken her heart, but they'd also freed her to build something infinitely more beautiful than anything she could have created while settling for their version of success. As Simone left that conference room for the final time, she thought about the woman she'd been 5 years ago, heartbroken, legally powerless, financially devastated, convinced her story was over. That woman could never have imagined this triumph, this peace, this sense of coming home to herself. But perhaps that woman's pain had been necessary. Perhaps you have to lose yourself completely before you can find out who you really are. Perhaps the people who try to steal your dreams are actually giving you the greatest gift possible, the motivation to build something so authentically yours that it can never be taken away. The last text message Simone received that day came from Mrs. Chen, now 81 and still dispensing wisdom with dumplings. Proud of you, child. Your grandmother's spirit is dancing in heaven. You took her recipes and turned them into revolution. Revolution. That's exactly what it had been. Not just a personal comeback, but a complete transformation of how she understood her own power, her own worth, her own capacity for creating something beautiful from the ashes of something broken. And if you're watching this story thinking about your own betrayals, your own stolen dreams, your own moments when someone tried to silence your authentic voice, remember this: your story isn't over. Your best recipes are still waiting to be created. Your most powerful voice is still waiting to be heard. The people who try to steal from you today are simply giving you tomorrow's motivation to build something they could never imagine, something so authentically yours that it makes their theft look like the desperate act of people who never understood what real success looks like. Because real success tastes like your grandmother's love, sounds like your authentic voice, and feels like coming home to yourself after a long journey through other people's versions of who you should be. And that, beautiful souls, is a recipe no one can ever steal. Thank you for joining me on this incredible journey of love, betrayal, and ultimate triumph. If Simone's story has inspired you, share it with someone who needs to remember their own power. Like this video if you believe in the magic of authentic success. Subscribe for more stories that prove love in all its forms always wins in the end. Until next time, keep cooking up your dreams and never let anyone convince you that their version of your story is better than your own truth. This is Mr. Ashbourne Golden Narratives, where every ending is really a beautiful beginning.